Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Monique. If you are new here, please do well to click on the red button below to subscribe. And to my subscribers, thank you all once again. Today we'll be learning how to make this asymmetric wrap dress with box pleat. So let's get started. I'll be using 3.5 yards of crepe fabric for this tutorial. So I'll be drafting it on the pattern paper. So I've gone ahead to rule out the shoulder line and I took another line on the center front. I'm using 4.5 inches before taking the straight line. Then on the back, I took 1 inch for the zipper allowance. What I'll do, I'll be drafting the back pattern first. So the first measurement I'll be taking is the shoulder width. The shoulder is 15 divided by 2. It gives me 7.5. I added half an inch. That's 8 inches. So I'm coming down by 1 inch. Then I'll take the neck width. I'm using 4 inches for the neck width. Then on the neck depth, I'll be using 2 inches. Remember, I said I'm drafting the back. So I'll go ahead and connect the neckline like this. After doing that, I'll take the shoulder slope from this 1 inch mark I took. Then from the shoulder slope, I'll take the chest line, which is 8 inches. I'll draw out the line. Then I'll start taking every other measurement from the main line. So I'm taking the waist, the hip, and the full length. So the waist is 17 inches. The hip is 26 and the full length is 38 inches. So I'll go ahead and place the shoulder measurement on the chest line and I'll take a straight line. Then what I'll do, I'll come down by 2 inches from the chest line to get my dart. So I'm taking 4.5 inches on the for the dart. So I'm taking it all the way to the hip line. Then I'll come up by 2 inches from the hip line. Then I'll take a straight line like this. Then I'll take half inch on both sides on the waist. Then I'll connect it to this point like so. Now I'll be taking the bust circumference. The bust is 38 divided by 4 will give me 9.5. I'm adding 2 inches for seam allowance. Then on the waist is 31 divided by 4 will give me 7.75. I'm replacing this 1 inch for that. Then I'm adding 2 inches for seam allowance. On the hip is 40 divided by 4. It will give me 10. I'm adding 2 inches for seam allowance. So what I have on the hip line, I'll place it on the full length. That is 12 inches. So I'll go ahead and connect the lines. After doing that, I'll take the center of this line and I'll come in by half an inch. Then I'll take a slant line and connect it to the shoulder width. Now I'll take the armhole round like so to the bust circumference. Then I'm going to trace the back on the front. I'll make sure the line are aligning. That is the zipper line is aligning with the 4.5 inches line I took. So I'll go ahead and trace it out to get the front pattern. So after doing that, I'll take the back half length, that is 16 inches, to avoid zip bulge. I'll come in by 0.75. Then I'll go ahead and connect the line. Then I'll connect it out this way. So I'll be cutting this out later on. So now we'll be going to the front pattern. I've traced it with my tracing wheel. So I'll go ahead and mark out the chest line, the waistline, and the hip line. So the next thing I'll do is to take the shoulder to bust point. The shoulder to bust point is 11 inches. So I'll go ahead and connect the line. Next thing I'll take is the bust span measurement. The bust span is 8 inches divided by 2 will give me 4 inches. I'm adding half an inch, that's 4.5. I'm placing it on the waist and on the full length. Sorry, on the hip, I beg your pardon. So on the hip, I came up by 2 inches. Then I'll take a straight line. Then I'll take half inch on both sides like this. Then on the bust point, I'll come down by 1 inch. Then I'll connect the line like so. So after doing this, the next thing I'll do is from the neck width here. Remember, I used 4 inches for the neck width. I'll connect it all the way down to the waistline here. So what I'll do, I'll mark out this waistline outside like this so that I'll know how to connect the line. So from this point, I'll take a slant line to this point like this. So this will be our neckline. Remember, I said it's a wrap dress. So now I'm going to cut it out. Then before then, I'm going to make a curved line to meet this point here. So I'll just use a broken line to connect it to this point before tracing it out like so. If you have a hip curve ruler, you can use your hip curve ruler to achieve this. So the next thing I'll do is to cut it out. I'm doing this for only the front pattern. So I'll cut out the neckline. So I'll be cutting 2 of this on the fabric. So on the back, I'll cut out the excess here to avoid zip bulge. So we are done with our pattern. I'll be drafting it on the fabric. So this is our fabric. This is the back pattern. So my pattern is a little bit short. I added extra 4 inches on the fabric so that I'll have it to be longer than the pattern. So now I'll just go ahead and notch the waistline because that's where I'll be fixing a belt. So this is the front pattern I cut out too. So it's going to be like this. The dress is going to be wrapped like this. So I've gone ahead to cut out facing for the front. Then I've also gone ahead to cut facing for the back. That's the neckline. So this is the facing. I'll be adding interfacing to it later on. So I used the front neckline to cut out the facing. The facing is about 4 inches wide. So I'll be explaining that later. So now I'll be making a quick sleeve. The fabric is on a fold. So I'll come down by 4 inches for the sleeve. I'll take a straight line. I'm using 4 inches. Then on this 4 inches line, I'll take half of the armhole round, which is 8 inches. I'll add 1.5 inches for seam allowance. Then the length of the sleeve is 18 inches. I'm adding 2 inches for seam allowance. That's 20 inches. Then I'll make a slant line from this 1.5 inches seam allowance to this folded part. That is the center front. Then after taking the slant line, I'll get the midpoint of the slant line. Here is about 5 inches. Then on this 5 inches point, I'll come down by 1/2 inch. Then I'll make a curve like this to meet the 1/2 inch. Then I'll connect it all the way to the seam allowance. So after doing that, on the full length, I made it ×2 of the sleeve round so that I'll have excess volume on the fabric. So I'll just go ahead and connect it this way like an A-line shape. Then I'll cut it out. So this is the sleeve. I'll be attaching elastic to this part so that it will give it fullness. I'll be cutting 2 of this. Then I'm going to reduce this part by 1/2 inch. This side will be the front of the sleeve. So I'll be explaining this later on. So now I've gone ahead to attach that on the main fabric. This is the center back of the fabric. I won't be adding zip to it because it's an open dress. So I'll sew it by 1 inch. Then sew the darts. This is the front pattern. I'll do the same thing. I'll sew the darts by 1/2 inch. So I'll sew it and I'll come back and show you. So guys, I've gone ahead to sew the dart on the front pattern. So this is one side of the front and this is the other side. I stitched it by 1/2 inch. I repeated the same thing on the back. I've joined the center back and I've also fixed the darts by 1/2 inch. So I've also gone ahead to attach interfacing on the facing. So I'll place it on the center front, on the neckline of the front pattern. I'll be sewing it by 1/2 inch all the way to the end. So I'll repeat the same thing on the other side of the front. Then on the back, I'll also place the facing on it like so on the neckline. Then I'll sew it by 1/4 inch all the way like so. So guys, I've gone ahead to stitched it by 1/4 inch. That is the facing on the front. So I've also given it a good press, so we'll have something like this. So I repeated the same thing on the other side of the front. So this is the 2 panels on the front. So it's going to have a belt here. I'll be placing a belt here. So before then, I'll place the front and the back together on the neckline. That is from the shoulder seam. I'll place the front and back together. So I'll pick the 2 shoulders like this. That's the back and the front. I'll make sure it's aligning on the stitched part. Then I'll pin it up and I'll sew it by 1/2 inch here. I'll repeat the same thing on the other side of the shoulder. Pin it up, then sew it by 1/2 inch. After doing that, I'll make sure the front and the back are aligning on the sides. So to sew the side seam, I left 2 inches for seam allowance, but I'll be sewing it by 1 inch to give it ease. I'll be sewing here by 1 inch. I'll do that and show you. So guys, I've gone ahead to join the side seam and also I've gone ahead to join the shoulder to that's the front and back shoulder together. So as you can see, our dress is already taking shape. I left about 1.5 inches here on the waist because a belt is going to pass through that hole. So this is how the dress will be. I'll place the belt here. So to achieve that, I'm going to place another one here. That's the 2 belts. I've gone ahead to cut out a strip of fabric. I folded it into 2. So I have about 5 inches on a fold. It will be 2.5. So I'll be sewing it by 1/2 inch. I'll also sew this part here to close it. Then I'll turn it from the other side. I'll turn it over on the other side. So this is the belt. It's about 40 inches long. My waist is 31 inches. I made it about 40 inches long. I cut out 2. So I'll be placing the belt on this side here that I told you earlier. So I'll place it here. Then I'm going to sew it by 1/2 inch, like so. We will have something like this. I'll repeat the same thing on the other side of the waist. That's this part. Then I'll pin it up. So I'll be sewing it. Then I'll show you. So guys, I've gone ahead to join the belt to the dress. So I joined it on that part I notched earlier on the center front of the waist. So I'll be tucking it in on this hole. I told you I left 1.5 inches earlier on the waist. So I'll tuck it in like this. So it will pass through this part and the other side of the belt will go round the dress. So you can tie it however you want. You can tie it on the back or on the front. So now on the hemline, I'm going to attach a ruffle to this part here. From this point, I'll take it all the way round to the end. So I'll measure what I have on the hemline. I have about 80 inches. So I'll be timesing it by 3 to cut out the strip of fabric I'll be using for the ruffles. So I'll do that and I'll show you. So guys, I've gone ahead to cut out a strip of fabric. I timesed it by 3. I remember I said it's 80 inches, but I have about 250 for the strip of fabric. I have about 250 for the length. So I'll be attaching them together like this so that I'll have a very long strip. I'll be joining them all the way. This is the other strip. I'll join them all to have a very long strip. Then what I also did was I cut the width by 10 inches. So on a fold, it's going to be on a fold. On a fold, I'll be left with 5 inches. So I'm going to, as you can see, I have 5 inches here. So I'm going to stitch it together here by 1/2 inch so that it will be firm, so that I'll have one piece. So this is it. I've stitched it. As you can see, it's firm. I used 1/2 inch, to stitch it. And this is the long strip of fabric I'll be using for the box pleat. So how to do that? I'll place it here on the hemline. From this, I'll start placing it on the belt, that is after the belt. So I'll pin it up here like this. Then what I'll do, I'm going to mark about 3 inches, like so. From the beginning here, I'll mark 3 inches. So I'll continue to take 3 inches all the way to the end of the belt. So what I'll do, I'll pick this first mark, this 3 inches mark here. I'll place it to touch the next 3 inches line like this. Then I'm going to pin it up. Then this other mark, remember I told you I used 3 inches. I'll pick it up also to touch this point here, like a key split. So then I'll pin it up. After doing this, I'll pick the next mark, this next 3 inches line. This point, I'll fold it also to meet the other mark, this other mark here. I'll fold it to meet this point here, like so. So I'll pin it up. So the next one will go to the next mark like this. So I'll fold it to touch this 3 inches. I'll pin it up. Now the next one will meet this other part here. So I'll fold this other part to kiss the other box pleat like this. So I'll pin it up. So the next one will touch the next mark here. I'll also pin this up. So I'll continue to do this all the way to the end. So I'll repeat the same thing, fold this to kiss the other side. Then I'll be sewing it by 1/2 inch and I'll have something like this when I'm done. So it depends on you. You can use 1 or 2 inches for your box pleat. It all depends on your preference. So I'll go ahead and sew it all the way to the end and I'll show you when I'm done. So guys, I've gone ahead to attach the pleat to the box pleat to the hemline. So I decided to use 2 inches because I noticed the box pleats were too big. So I used 2 inches mark all the way. So we are almost done with our dress. So the next thing is to fix the sleeve. So remember, we've cut out our sleeve. I'll just go ahead and fold it like so. Then I'm going to sew it by 1 inch all the way down. So I'm going to pin it up. I'll be sewing it by 1 inch. Then I'm going to fold the hemline by 1/2 inch and I'll refold it again by 1/2 inch. I'll sew it all the way around. I'll leave a little space here to tuck in the elastic. So I've stitched it by 1 inch, and I've also hemmed the full length, and I left this part open here where my elastic will pass through. So I'm going to fix the elastic. So I'll be cutting it. My round sleeve is about 9 inches, but I'll be cutting the elastic by 8 inches. Then I'll cut out 2 for the elastic. So this is what I have. I have about 8 inches. I'll use a safety pin to tuck it in on the sleeve. So I'll place it on this part I left open. Then I'm going to tuck it in all the way like this. So I'll pick the 2 edge of the elastic and I'll top stitch on it. After I top stitch it, I'll be left with something like this. So this is our sleeve. So I'll be attaching it to the dress on the side seam here, the 2 side seam. I'll make sure they are aligning. Then I'll place it this way. I'll sew it, I'll pin it up here. Then I'll sew it all the way round. I'll repeat the same thing for the second sleeve and I'll come back and show you. So guys, I've attached the sleeve to the dress. So I have excess, so I pleated it on the shoulder. So this is the elastic on the sleeve. This is the other sleeve. So we've actually come to the end of these tutorials. Our dress is ready. This is the ruffles. So this is the complete dress. I hope these tutorials was helpful. Please don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and share. Thanks for watching.